Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen Azodomegu. I am a graduate student in the Master of Arts in Professional Communication program at Royal Roads University. I'm joining you today from the traditional homelands of Métis Nation, Treaty 6 territory here in Edmonton, where I am grateful to live and work.
I'm Brian Eatma. I'm a Royal Road student completing the Bachelor of Arts in Professional Communication program. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw ancestors and families here in Nanaimo, where I'm grateful to live, work, and study. We'd also like to acknowledge that Royal Roads University campus is located on the traditional lands of the Kusepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families.
We're excited to welcome you to today's conference session entitled Iran Protest Didn't Happen, Defenseless Women Amid Western Hypocrisy. Our speaker today is Dr. Yasser Abdelrahim. Dr. Yasser is an assistant professor of visual communication and currently teaches for Master of Arts in Intercultural and International Communication at Royal Roads University. His published research is focused on visual framing, visual discourse and media representation, and social media. His current research examines the photographic framing of Arabs during World War II and the visual representation of gender protests in Lebanon. Today's session will be 45 minutes in length, and we hope to have time for questions at the end. Brian and I will go off camera momentarily, but I will be gathering questions that you pose in the chat throughout the discussion. So please feel free to leave any questions you might have for us, and we will gather all that. And at the end, time permitting, we will come back on camera and pose your questions to Dr. Yasser. Welcome once again to today's session, and what I know will be an interesting and engaging discussion. And I'll turn you over to Dr. Yasser.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you, Brian. Jackie, can you please share this, the presentation, the PowerPoint file? Hello, everyone. My name is Yasser Abdelrahim, and thank you for joining me today. I want to start by acknowledging that we learn, live, and work on the traditional lands of Kusepsum and Algonquin families, now known as Esquimalt and Songhees people. As Maureen said, my talk's title is Iran Protests Did Not Happen, Defenseless Women Amid Western Hypocrisy. Next slides, please. That's my title. Next slide, please. My talks today is about women protests that erupted in Iran after the death of the 22-year-old Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, who has been killed on the 16th of September 2022 because strands of her hair were showing from underneath the headscarf, or what we call the hijab. Detaining and beating Amini was, as we all know, an act of a great evil in the name of Iran's regime righteousness. The death of Mahsa Amini led Iranian women, particularly young women, to go out onto the street to protest for the rights against the women oppression and police brutality. It was the date, the death of Mahsa Amini was the date that marked the beginning of a new struggle of Iranian women toward a very little of their usurped rights. Iran is one of the countries, such as many in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, where women have fully to cover their hair in the public. Next slide, please. Okay, now some might be surprised that I claim that Iran protests did not happen, and I still stand with my claim, which is I actually borrowed its essence from one of the prominent figures in the field of cultural studies and postmodernity, Jean Baudrillard. In 1991, Jean Baudrillard wrote his book, The Gulf War Did Not Take Place. And it was a collection of 3 articles, as you see in my slides. The first article was published in the newspaper Libération. The 3 articles was published between January and March 1991, but the first article was published on January 4th, 1991, and Baudrillard chose the title, the Gulf War Will Not Take Place, and actually it was taking place, but he decided to use this title, the Gulf War Would Not Take Place. The second article was published on February the 6th, and he chose a title, the Gulf War Is Not Really Taking Place. Also, it was published in the Libération newspaper and the Guardian, the British newspaper, The Guardian. And the last article he published in this collection was The Gulf War Did Not Take Place, and it was published on March the 29th. That was those articles. I guess some of you are familiar with the Gulf War, which took place to liberate Kuwait from the occupation that Saddam Hussein decided to do in August 1990. Baudrillard, what Baudrillard meant with that the Gulf War did not take place, that he believed that the Gulf War was not really a war, but rather atrocity which masqueraded as a war, which was represented as a war. Almost nothing was made known about the Iraqi death. And this fighting, from his point of view, didn't take place from the point of view of the West. Moreover, all that spectators got to know about was more about propaganda mostly from CNN, and that's why maybe some of you, I'm not sure if some of you know that this Gulf War in particular was the reason for Qatar to establish Al Jazeera in 1995 to respond to what they considered an American propaganda. Next slide, please. My question here on whether the Iranian protests or the photos of Iranian protests. Here I have a question: where the photos of women protests in Iran real? And my question, as you know, as you see, seems silly, but since the death of Mahsa Amini, the wave of protests has spread across the country and included people from of all walks of life. I believe that most of us saw those photos of Iranian women protesting in Tehran and actually across the country. But I argue here that women protests in Iran are what the West wanted to see, but there was very little that the West did to put pressure on the Iranian regime, basically to put pressure on the Iranian regime to stop its brutality against the peaceful protesters. Also, if we ask the leaders of the democratic countries about the coordinated support for Iranian protests, the response would be no more than empty words, rhetoric about the brutality of Iran, but nothing more. And this rhetoric will not save the Iranian from what they suffered. It's just as someone came from Middle East, what we really face is something that Western media, people in the West, do not have a complete idea about the gravity of the situation, whether in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, or in Iran, about the brutality of the regime. Next slide, please. So, can you? I need one. Okay. So during this protest, and as you see in the report that published by the Guardian, Iranian forces shooting at faces and genitals of female protesters, medics says. And during this protest, Iranian authorities cracked down on demonstrators with lethal violence. As of January, the government has January 2023, the government has executed at least 4 prisoners over crimes that claim they committed during the demonstration, underlining the speed at which Iranian authorities are carrying out the death sentences of detainees and detainees. In addition to executing prisoners, Iran admitted that they detained thousands amid nationwide anti-government protests shaking the country, acknowledging that acknowledging for first time. So that was the first time that Iran acknowledged that they detained tens of thousands of protesters. As Tara Safiri Far, a senior Iran researcher at Human Rights Watch, put it, the Iranian authorities' brutal response to protests across many cities indicates concerted action by the government to crush dissent with cruel disregard of life. The security forces' widespread shooting of protesters only served to fuel anger against a corrupt and autocratic government. According to Monitor, which is a US-based human rights, 560 protesters have been killed since the beginning of the protests. Additionally, Human Rights Activist News Agency, or what they call it, Ahrana, estimated that the number of people who have been detained since the beginning of the protest is more than 19,200. Among them, 687 students as of the 3rd of January of 2023. Next slide, please. Now, despite the European Council, European Council approval of the conclusions against Iran that condemned the use of force, the brutality, and the disproportionate use of force by the Iranian authorities against the peaceful protesters, including women and children, leading to loss of hundreds of lives. What could be surprising here is that German exports to Iran climbed 12.7%. So this is what I see as hypocrisy from some of the Western powers. That's year on year from January to November 2022, around 1.5 billion euros. Likewise, the total trade in goods and services, both exports and imports between UK and Iran was 670 million English pound in the 4 quarters to the end of the 3rd quarter of 2022, which indicates an increase of 114%, 114.1% of, or 357 euro. I guess that's euro, million euro from the 4 quarters to the end of the 3rd quarter of 2021. So you can see from the graph here that there's an increase from the title that from Euronews that German exports increased like to Iran despite the protests that was happening in Iran. Also, Iran took part in a international tourism fair in Spain. So things seem, or events seem to go normally, naturally with some countries, with some, that's what published in news. So I claim that we don't know everything, and there could be some other projects between Iran and some European countries that we don't know about, while the Iranian regime was using excessive force against peaceful protesters. Next slide, please. Now, the woman protesting against hijab was entirely symbolic, and it's actually this protest was not the first time for Iranian women to protest against for their rights against the covering their hair. So Iranian women has long history of actually political activism and mobilization in the country. But they were rarely featured at the center of social movements, and that's maybe the first time that women, Iranian women, was featured with the focal point, the focal point of this of the protests. And what makes the protests of Iran unique is that it has been unexpected. The protests that erupted in the wake of the death of the Mahsa Amini, that it was unexpected, unthinkable in Iran, which has for decades been ruled by brutal regime, to witness, so it was unexpected for the regime to witness a large protest principally led by and for women for 5 months. And historically, the protests that erupted in Iran was against the head cover, or what we call the hijab, was not, as I said, the first one. 1 month after the Islamic Revolution in 1997, Iranian women, as you see in the photo, launched a massive demonstrations after hearing whispers about hijab mandate. And actually, the protests succeeded to postpone the mandate. They were able to postpone the mandate, but they were not able to prevent it. So the mandate, the hijab mandate, was actually imposed upon them in 1983. So they managed to postpone it for 4 years. They were promised that they will not have this mandate, but then later on, this hijab mandate was imposed upon them in 1983. Now, writing for the New Yorker, Robin Wright declared that we were witnessing the first mass uprising in the Iranian history. He wrote about the 1997, saying we were witnessing the first mass uprising in Iranian history, in which women marching together under the Kurd feminist slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom," serve as both the spark and engine. Actually, Robin Wright was talking about this protest, not the 1997 protest. I believe what was remarkable in the 2022 protest in Iran is that these protests are considered signs that the Iranian women have shown about the ideologizing their bodies, such as cutting their hair. And I can answer why they cut their hair if they get a question about this, why they cut their hair, burning their hijab and dance as a sign of joy. The female body have been for a long time an object and symbol of theocratic ideology, is now emerging to be the most serious threat to the legitimacy of the regime. Next slide, please. Now, taking it to the streets is actually a song, but in here it's not a song in this, and they never played it in the protest. But historically, Iranians have used to taking their demands to the streets. So, as I explained before, it was not the first time that Iranian women and Iranians go out onto the street to try to exert some pressure on the government. There was once a strong belief among many Iranians that if they wanted something, then they just had to go out onto the street and demand it. And the idea was fostered by the role of many Iranians had in deposing Shah Muhammad Raza Pahlavi and bringing back the radical Islam cleric Ayatollah Khomeini from exile, thinking that the Islamic regime will bring in justice and democracy. That they brought the Ayatollah Khomeini from exile in France in 1997, and actually, when they did this, they ended 2,500 years of Persian monarchy, replacing it with the Islamic Republic. Now, the Shah was seen as autocratic, brutal, and oppressive dictator who was attempting to westernize the country against the will of the people. The opposition to the Shah brought together what we call an odd mix of Marxist, socialist, Islamic fundamentalists. And this unlikely coalition succeeded by demonstrations, strikes, marches, and news propaganda in forcing Shah and its supporters to flee Iran, and actually Shah flew to Egypt. As his wife at this time was one of the members of the royal family in Egypt. So to bring Ayatollah in, so by doing this, they managed, as I said, to bring the revolution back then. Managed to bring Ayatollah Khomeini to and his Islamic revolution. One of the prominent Tehran or Iranian-based sociologist, Hamid Raza Jalibur, believes that the majority, Hamid Raza Jalibur was commenting on the protest now and the probability or the possibility of having getting rid of this Islamic regime. So Hamid Raza said that the majority of Iranians are unwilling to participate in protests that are designed to throw the regime, despite the significant gap between the regime and the rest of the population. Next slide, please. Okay, Iran has, as I said, Iranian women has long history in political activism. So, according to the Middle East historian Irvan Abdelrahim, Iran's protest culture emerged during the late 19th century in bazaars, and bazaar usually they were located in just streets. So this was no coincidence that the bazaar, the marketplace, the bank, the school, and religious centers all rolled into one, was the nexus of the Iranian public life, that people were just going out, and women never before was oppressed during that time. So they before the Islamic Revolution, shopkeepers and members elected leaders independently of the Shah, and lacking and the only way for them to protect their interests was with petitions. Back then was petitions and demonstrations. The first Iranians to organize mass protest were the merchants and bankers who in 1905 led a procession to the state treasury to demand payment on loans and object to economic policies that favored Russian traders over Persian ones. When the monarchy did not comply, the protesters shut down the bazaars and took refuge at nearby mosque, and where they remained until 5 days later their demands were reconsidered. So Iranians succeeded before in get their demands, not just once, but even when they took to the street in 1997 to get rid of the Shah. Next slide, please. Okay, the Time magazine named the Iranian women as the Women of the Year. My question here, can they bring any change? Now, one of the changes that these protests managed to achieve is that the government announced the suspension of the police morality. As you know, Mahsa Amini was arrested because by the police, the morality police. She was arrested by the morality police for not wearing the headscarf or the hijab, and the morality police exist in different countries, like Saudi Arabia, for example. They check if men goes to pray or not. I have an incident where a friend told me that he was going. That's of the presentation, but just to show you the brutality or the oppression of those type of police, morality police. And my friend was going out, and he missed one of the prayers, and the police, the morality police stopped him, touched his hair to make sure that if he was going outside to pray, when they found that his hair is not wet enough, which to get ready for prayers, they just detained him. The women in Iran managed to force the government, at least for a while, to suspend the morality police. Now, and what reporters said, that it seems that the government is ready, at least at the moment, to lower their gaze on the hijab, and so women now can go to their work without wearing a hijab. But I believe from my experience with the Middle East governments, that I believe that this is a tactical step, just to make sure that reduce the volume of protests, which actually was reduced I guess in January. The number of protests have been declined. So I believe this is the maneuver from the government to try to reduce the number of protests. Some would see the suspension of morality police as a success, but as I said, it could be just a tactic from the government, and people on social media, people on social media counter that, announce it's the government tactic to divide and weaken the opposition. Next slide, please. Now, can we predict a revolutionary change in Iran? This picture of unveiled, the woman, this young lady who appeared without a hijab. This picture was taken during the funeral of Mahsa Amini. So based on what we saw over the few months, can we predict a revolutionary change in Iran? My answer, and another professor answer in sociologist, is no. We cannot predict. It's no one predicted the Arab Spring. So Al-Giordano Porte, a prominent Cuban American socialist, makes useful distinction about three factors, or made useful distinction between three factors: steady states or stable system, trends, and events. And in his words, said, we are unlikely to work out theory that will accurately predict large-scale, complex, and frequently occurring events like revolutions. They are not common enough, and we are not clever enough to predict them. According to the traditional approaches of traditional approaches of social media, such as the functionalist approach, the causes of social change are themselves entailed a change in the structure of power, which without a change in the structure of power, it's very difficult to have a change occurring in the such as revolutions. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of the example of many artists' work Now, art started taking part in the revolution. This is from the Toronto-based Iranian Canadian artist and filmmaker Hajar Muradi. She designed this poster just for an event to honor Mahsa Amini. And next slides, please. Okay, just before the question, to conclude here, despite the sanction that Iran has been facing and the uncertain future about its economics, it's unlikely that social change can happen without a change in the structure of power in the Islamic Republic. Remarkably, however, while the story of the Iranian people today is certainly one of long suffering, it's also one of undimmed courage, as can be seen so clearly in the regular will to protest, in spite of the cost, the death of hundreds and the detention of thousands, tens of thousands of people. Encouraging as the images of persistent protests are, it appears to be still a long way for the democratic dream or the Iranian democratic dreams and hopes of the current generation of revolutionaries, as well as those among their parents and grandparents who marched for free liberal Iran back in 1997, marched again in 2022 to become a reality. Thank you for listening, and I'll be glad to answer questions if you have them.
Thanks, Yasser. We have one question from Sarah. The Iranian government has blamed Western media for instigating the protests, alluding to foreign conspiracies. How does this fit into your belief of Western hypocrisy?
Well, I wouldn't. The Iranian regime is like any dictatorship. They blame the West. I know the West has their own interests, but I don't. I know that the West have their own interests, economic interests, and they would keep it. But I see that the Iranian blame is not really, from my perspective, is not a solid one, and we know that there is no any respect of the dignity of human being in Iran or in different countries like surrounding Iran. So I don't think that this the West is using the West is using this this protest to just to kind of play a game against the Iranian regime, maybe to force them to get into like the nuclear negotiate nuclear their nuclear program again. But I don't see this. In Egypt, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like those countries, we have a very bad record of human rights. Those governments have very bad record of human rights, and it's known for everybody.
Thanks. Another question from Barb. There's so much context that the West does not communicate. How can we, as citizens of Canada, support these types of movements? Well,
thank you, Barb. I believe that the first way to support Iran is to try to find ways to strengthen civil society in Iran. I would go with intelligence, basically, because this is the way. There is no way to help Iranians or help except through the through supporting and strengthening civil society. That could be through also bringing more Iranian to the West for scholarships and education. Many Iranians need to see the real image, to see what's happening. Those who are brainwashed by the Islamic Islamic Republic they just don't. They think, as some believe, that the West is the enemy, and we need just to educate people and to work, think out of the box to find a way to support civil societies in Iran, because without civil societies in Iran, there's no, the only other way to see a change is a war, which it will be something, it will be catastrophic because the Iranian regime is not about, from my understanding, the Iranian regime would fight not because of the government, it's because the existence of the radical Shia, like Hezbollah and this regime. So it would be like a war. It's not about just interest or keeping the government, changing a different government. It's about their existence, basically. So we should find smart ways to help Iranians.
Thanks, Yasser. Just about 4 minutes left. Here's a question from Rebecca. The trade statistics you shared were interesting. Do you have any other examples of other Western nations trade with Iran?
No, I actually I checked most of the European nations, and I know that those like a few examples, but still one example like Germany. Germany is one of the countries that maintains strong trade with Iran, which it was for me, and UK still maintain their trade with Iran, and this is for me is enough. It's not about how many, it's about the ethical side itself, that no country should have any business or trade with Iran. So, but to get back to the question of, I looked up the several countries. I just posted also a news that Iran is participating in an international affair about tourism in Spain. So that means Spain is fine. We don't know what exactly is played under the table with some countries.
Thanks, Yasser. Here's a question from Kelly. Would it help Iranian civil society for Canadians to pressure our federal government to engage in a different kind of diplomatic engagement? If so, what would you recommend?
Definitely. I wouldn't withdraw. Definitely. We need pressure from the Canadian government, but I wouldn't, for example, cut ties with Iran, because if we cut ties with Iran, that's what they want. I believe that there should be more monitoring events in Iran, that the Canadian government try to more of people going in the field in the terms of with the protection of their diplomatic immunity, to see, and this is actually one of the things that Iran says, that everything that people say is actually wrong. Is just a lie. They didn't say, actually. They said that Mahsa Amini did not die because of brutality or because of the detention. It's just because of natural. It was a natural death. So they lie about everything. So we need people in the Canadian government to have a good number of diplomats try to engage with the civil society to help them with education, bringing more of initiatives to the Iranian. So this is the way, more initiative to the civil society. This is the only way to help Iranian and to get them to know either through education or through different projects, including educating women, mentorship programs. Those will, on the long run, there is no short-term program that would achieve something tangible. That's what I can say.
Thanks, Yasser. Another question from Barb. In your opinion, do you think that the Iranians who are protesting this in other Western countries are in danger? How far is the Iranian reach outside of the country?
The Iranian protesting outside of the country?
In other Western countries, yes.
Are in danger? That's a question of Barb. No, I don't think they are in danger. I don't think the Iranian government will go after the protesters. They are not like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is just they have different way. I haven't found a record that the Iranian went after dissenters or opposition outside the country, what Saudi Arabia did with Gamal Khashoggi, for example. So I don't think, and so far one of the issues that, from as far as I know, there's no public figures, Iranian public figures outside. There's just protesters. So as long as there is no public figure protesting against the Iranian regime that could be a threat, I don't orderly protester. I wouldn't be subject for any risk, I guess.
And we have time for one final question from Sean. Do you think Canada bringing itself more in line with the US position on Iran, for example, shutting down the embassy, has made it harder for us to assist Iranian civil society? I know Canadian tourists have a harder time getting in now.
Yeah, I think shutting down embassies is not the right step. I believe, is it the U.S. embassy that cut the ties with Iran, or the Canadian one? I just got based on the question because Brian.
Sean says Canada did under Harper.
Okay, yeah, I think it's wrong position, and it's a wrong decision. I'm sorry, to cut ties, because once you cut ties, you just you're out. You don't have an eye. So this is what they want, basically. As long as you're not Russia, you're not China, you're not helping their interests. If you go outside, if you just leave the country, that's fine for them. So I think you need eyes in the country to help civil societies. Without eyes, without diplomats and programs that could support the civil society, I don't think any change will be possible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yasser, for that wonderful insight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the audience or for the questions.
Yes. And with that, we've come to the end of this session. And thank you all for participating. We'll now go on a lunch break and we'll come back at 1 p.m. for the next session, titled Restoring Our Humanity. How are we going to be together in the times ahead?